Once upon a time, in a small village, there lived a kind-hearted shoemaker named Mr. Meadows. He was very talented at crafting the most beautiful shoes, known far and wide for their quality and comfort. However, despite his skills, Mr. Meadows had fallen on hard times. There was but one piece of leather left in his tiny shop, and it was just enough to make a single pair of shoes. One chilly night, Mr. Meadows carefully cut the leather and laid it on his workbench. "I'll finish these shoes in the morning," he said with a hopeful sigh. The next morning, a wondrous surprise awaited him. Instead of the pieces of leather he had left, there sat a perfectly polished, exquisitely crafted pair of shoes gleaming in the sunlight. Mr. Meadows couldn't believe his eyes. How could this be? He marveled. It wasn't long before a wealthy customer came into the shop, and upon seeing the magnificent shoes, gladly purchased them. With the money he earned, Mr. Meadows bought enough leather to make 2 pairs of shoes. As night fell, he prepared the leather with the same care as before and thought once more to finish them in the morning. To his amazement, the next morning, 2 pristine pairs of shoes were ready on his workbench. Again, customers quickly bought the shoes, and Mr. Meadows was able to buy even more leather, each night preparing his cuts for the shoes. This wondrous making of shoes continued, with shoes being crafted overnight. Mr. Meadows pondered on who his secret helpers could be. One evening, he whispered to his wife, "Mrs. Meadows, let us stay up tonight and discover who is being so generous." They hid behind a curtain in the workshop. As the clock struck midnight, 2 tiny elves appeared, dressed in tattered clothes, and began working their magic. Their hands were swift and nimble. They sang cheerful tunes as they stitched, molded, and polished the shoes to perfection. Mr. and Mrs. Meadows couldn't believe their eyes. The elves worked tirelessly until the shoes were ready, then vanished into the night. Touched by the elves' kindness, the couple decided to return the favor. With the profits they had gained from the splendid shoes, Mrs. Meadows stitched 2 new outfits for the elves, complete with little hats and shoes. The next evening, instead of preparing the leather pieces, they laid out the gifts on the workbench and hid. That night, the elves found the new clothes waiting for them. With beaming smiles, they dressed in their new attire, twirled about in joy, and danced around the room. After their dance, they skipped happily out of the door. From that night on, the elves never returned, but Mr. Meadows continued to find great success with his skills. Now restored in fortune, the shoemaker and his wife were eternally grateful for the elves' help. They spread kindness wherever they could as a way to thank the universe, and so, because of a little magic and a lot of kindness, Mr. and Mrs. Meadows lived happily ever after, surrounded by the warmth of their village and the joy of making beautiful shoes.